Thank you for joining us for today's Ask an Expert webinar. We will wait a couple of minutes to give all participants a chance to log on. We will now begin today's Ask an Expert webinar, Fundraising 101. I am Mitch Menchaca, Executive Director of the Association of California Symphony Orchestras, and I'm joined by my colleague, Caroline Furman, Conference and Programs Manager. We are excited to have you join us today. Before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. You have joined today's webinar in listen-only mode and can hear today's presentation through your computer speakers. We want to make sure that this webinar is interactive even though you are muted and in listen-only mode. One way to participate is to ask a question through the questions poll. However, if you'd like to not hear your webinar through your computer speakers, you can also join by the telephone by clicking on the Use Telephone. Again, a way to participate in today's webinar is through the questions panel. So you can just type your question into the question pane and hit Submit. Our presenter will ask a multiple choice poll at the beginning of today's presentation and at the end, another way to be interactive in today's webinar. If you run into any problems during today's webinar, please call the AXO office at 1-800-495-2276 or email us at membership@axo.org. You can also type in the questions pane if you're having any technical questions, and we will try to connect with you during the webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded for archival purposes. Now let's begin today's webinar. Our presenter is Kelly Lucera, who was appointed Executive Director of the Long Beach Symphony in 2013. Kelly's successes including ending each year with a surplus, increasing the board of directors and the donor base, creating a planned giving program, and assembling a strong new administrative team. Kelly previously served as President and CEO of the Pacific Chorale in Orange County for 9 years and VP of the Orange County School for the Arts, where she raised over $39 million, including $25 million for a capital campaign. Kelly served for a decade on the board of directors of AXO, including being one of our past presidents. As well, she was named as the City Commissioner in 2015 and elected 2016-2017 Vice President of the Long Beach Rotary. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for asking me. All right, so Mitch, you turning it over to me now?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with the full question, though, of how many folks on today's webinar are either nervous or dislike doing fundraising? So we'll just pop this poll up first and see, are you nervous or do you dislike fundraising? You can just select one of those options.
And I hope you're all honest. I know when I was an elementary school teacher coming out of college, And so jumping into the nonprofit arts world and the orchestra world was daunting and exciting enough. But when I got my first position as director of development for the School of the Arts, I had no teeth. No one had taught me how to do my job. I was hired because I had some great relationships in Orange County, but I didn't know how to fundraise, and I was terrified. So I was actually probably the worst fundraiser ever. I can own that. And I spent about 6 months looking at gift charts and tables and reading everything I could find on fundraising and talking to all of my colleagues about how to fundraise. And what wasn't I doing? I wasn't raising a dollar. And so I figured either I need to figure this out or I need to go back to teaching. So after a while of being just a disaster at fundraising, I decided to create a new philosophy that took me out of the whole situation. And so to date, now jump forward 20 years, I've raised about $80 million, and all because I use this sort of new philosophy that I can't wait to share with you today.
And so Kelly, it looks like that 40% of our folks say they are nervous or dislike fundraising, but 60% say no, they are not nervous or dislike fundraising. So we've turned it over to you, and we're ready for your presentation.
Okay, great. So Mitch, can you see my screen? Just some housekeeping.
I cannot, but let me just do this again.
I haven't gotten the presenter request.
Kelly, Lucera. Okay, you should have had it.
Oh, okay, it's coming in now.
Ta-da!
Ta-da! Okay, so everybody should see the top of the PowerPoint, and I'm happy to share this with you. Axel will be sharing this with you afterwards. So you know, just enjoy and think of questions, and I'd be happy to answer those at the end of the presentation. So welcome again to Fundraising 101. I include the nonprofit lifecycle model because I think it's important for people to know that all organizations go through this kind of sort of trajectory where you're startup, or maybe you're in your adolescent phase, or you're probably all board run. There may not be any staff members actually fundraising, and so this is a critical stage 2 is a critical time to you know, learn how to run an organization, run an orchestra. And at 3, you're sustaining, you're growing, and maybe you've hired a full-time staff member, maybe not. Usually the model is that at about $500,000 budget, when your budget's about $500,000, that's when the board starts to implode, and they're going to burn out. So they need some kind of staff member to run the organization. That's my experience. And then every organization, whether you're a $100,000 orchestra or a $100 million orchestra, goes through a period where you start to feel stagnant. And so that's a time to, obviously most of us don't want to dissolve. So that's a time to renew yourselves and take the next step. And that kind of change, that's the place where orchestras usually bring me in to help boards and staffs sort of go back and renew themselves by doing something different, which is not always comfortable. So I appreciate that you're on the call, and hopefully by the end you'll pick out at least one thing that you'll do differently. So as you personally go through this life cycle, that you are renewing yourself, maturing in your roles. Often we just start with engaging the board. Now, some of you are staff members, some of you are board members, but I think it's clear no matter what that the board members know when they're being vetted to come onto the board, that part of their role is indeed fund development. Not everybody is going to want to solicit, which is fine. As you'll see, there are plenty of places for everybody in this model, but everybody is in charge of resource development. Everybody, including all staff members, even if you're not a fundraising staff member. So everybody from box office, fundraising, marketing, everybody is in charge of fund development and needs to find their place in this model. Now, I'm going to spend most of this hour on individual giving. And why? Because look at the giving. This is giving USA. Most money that comes in to nonprofits in the US comes from individuals. Not to say that we don't get money from corporations, foundations, and government money, which has been included into foundations in this model. But most of the time, the biggest money will come in through individuals. And in my experience, I've fundraised after 9/11, I fundraised after Hurricane Katrina, and after 2009, it's the individuals who will save your organization. For those orchestras that relied very heavily on corporate and foundation money, that's usually the first money to dry up during the time of recession. Corporate money goes first, and then foundation assets shrink, so that goes second. It's the individuals who will save you. So if you have a diversified portfolio, that is the healthiest, just like your own personal IRAs. Also, if you are getting corporate money or foundation money, keep getting it. I'm not saying switch, but is the majority of your time, whether you're an executive director or development director or a board member, spent on individual giving? Regardless, all of this money comes in through personal relationships. So the stronger relationships you have with the corporations that make those decisions, the people sitting in those jobs, or in foundation giving, the people who actually run the money in the foundations, it's all about relationship development. So how are you spending your time? Now, when I first started as a terrible fundraiser, I would start at the top of this chart, sending out a letter. I think my letters were "Dear Friend of Music," something horribly vanilla. And, expecting people to give you money when you're not even going to use their name is, but we all learn somewhere. So I started with direct mail. I would send out a lot of letters. And if you get 2% back, that's actually a pretty good response rate. But it's very cold. You don't necessarily know these people, and that's why you're sending them generic letters. There's also good value. We all do direct mail appeals, and we tend to do them December and say June before our fiscal year. So it's also a good PR tool. But if you expect that to be your only way of raising money, then your success rate will be very low. Of course, if you personalize them, that makes it a little bit better. Telethon, telefundings, these are can be very expensive ways, because if you hire a company, you'll end up often only getting half of the money back that they've gotten, so they take a 50% cut. So it's the personal solicitation, the meeting one-on-one, having access for these people to have access to you. It is the hardest thing to do, and trust me, it was horrible for me. I would have flu-like symptoms at the thought of going to visit somebody and talking with them about money. It was terrifying. But that will be the easiest and the greatest, most successful way of raising money. Special events are, as you know, the highest, the most labor-intensive and the most expensive way to raise money. But we use them because it's a great way to get people together and to socialize. The key to a great special event fundraiser is the follow-up afterwards. All the people you don't know, to follow up with them and use them as now prospects and developing relationships through special events. So they are important. But so many times board members will say, what we need to do is we need to throw a golf tournament. Well, we do those, and they're labor intensive. So just keep in mind that it's the personal solicitation that will give you the biggest bang for your buck. So this is my philosophy. It is very simple, but it really it transformed my life, and it basically took me out of the picture. Raising money wasn't about my gift charts or my budget line items or my goals. It took me out of the scenario. I'm a matchmaker. I meet kind, generous people who will give back to their community, because that's the kind of people they are. They're going to do that because they want to make a difference. And I introduce them to this thing about which I love, which is orchestral music. And we get connected. They either choose to get connected, and we talk about how they can make a difference, or they hate it, and we let them go with love off our prospect list to go make a difference somewhere else. It's that simple. And so I spend a lot of time when I do board retreats talking with board members about how to be a matchmaker. How do you do that? And that you're just sharing your passion and your love for this art form with the world. And that's the philosophy. It's based on values, values-based fundraising. You need to know what your orchestra values. So I don't mean your mission statement or even your vision statement, but where you're going to go find your donors, or what's going to really connect you to people, whether it's foundation, corporation, individuals. is because you know who you are and what you stand for. Meaning, are you committed to, we would all say we're committed to artistry or artistic excellence probably, but in addition to that, because there are a lot of those, are you all about contemporary music, or are you a big commissioning orchestra? Do you have a social justice mission as well? Who are you? And do you have a huge music education program? These are the kinds of things that you want to make sure you know, because these values will guide you in terms of where to seek donors and how to connect with them once you have them. Your prospect knows what they value, and they know what they value because they either donate time and or money. So if the prospect were to open their checkbook, you can probably see what they value, whether they value excellence, or do they value contemporary music? Are they part of the YWCA board, or do they support big boys for big girls? I mean, those kinds of entities that support music education. They know what they value because they put money towards it. So your goal is to make a match between the prospects and what they value and your orchestra. Values-based fundraising. Why do people give? Most people give because they have an emotional attachment to it. Sometimes they give because they want their name on buildings or walls or in the program. But I found that most of the time it's because it resonates with who they are, how they were raised. Sometimes they give because you've demonstrated the success of your institution, or if you don't end in the black every year, that you're trying to change your business plan, or you have a plan to do something differently. They really want to see growth. Why do people give? Because it's a good time. You know, the child's graduated for Stanford, or they won the lottery, or there could be a timing issue. Most people give because they are asked. And just keep in mind, somebody else will. So if you don't, somebody else will, because they know that these people want to make a difference. They give because they share your values. Again, will people give in tough economic times? Absolutely. After 9/11, we would see sometimes donors dig deeper, and they want to support their neighborhood organizations. And also, they would give money, let's say, to the Red Cross. Sometimes they would split their gift in half because they want to support both. But they will still give. If they're going through bad economic times, that's the time to not abandon them. Most of these people will come back in some way. They'll reinvest, or they'll hit it big again, because that's they're entrepreneurial in spirit. And I found that if you abandon them at a time when they're having tough economic times because they've lost a property, or they've gone through a bank, whatever the issue is, they will remember that. So it's important to still keep those relationships going, even when people can't give you what you would hope that they would. So moves management, and this is it's a very simple circle of giving, where we start, if you look at prospect identification, how many people are coming into your circle, and think of this as a revolving wheel. So you bring people in through a particular prospect identification process, which we'll talk about. Then they move through a cultivation process, and we'll talk about that. Then at some point in time, somebody's got to ask. I don't like saying make an ask, because that causes me stress. I like to say people will want to contribute. So at some point in time, you need to ask them how they'd like to contribute. We call that solicitation. I've worked with orchestras where you've got a lot of people stuck in the cultivation because no one's willing to convert them over and actually see how we can make that match. Somebody in the organization, not everybody, has got to have that conversation with them. And then it's critical that you then steward them. And I mean thanking them, keeping them connected. And we'll talk about how to do that. A lot of organizations make an ask and then they stop. You don't hear from them again until the next year. And that's how you lose a lot of donors. So it's really important to keep them stewarded, and then that will guarantee, or to the best of our ability, that they'll renew their gift, and hopefully then they'll upgrade their gift. They'll give you more, and we'll talk about how to do that. Then you want them to help you bring more people into the wheel. So the wheel gets bigger and bigger and bigger because you've got a lot more moves. It's called moves management, and some universities you can actually study moves management and take courses on it. But what's not in the middle of the circle? You can see that the word values is. We've talked a little bit about that. What or who is not in the middle? My name's not in the middle. My music director's name isn't in the middle. The executive director, the development director, the board president. We've all seen organizations who have one person developing all those relationships, and it's very dangerous because when that one person moves on, you've got a lot of donors who go through.
Kelly, are you still with us? We may have lost her connection, so hold on for just a moment while we reach out to Kelly. We see her mouse moving. Kelly, okay,
yeah.
Great.
I was so passionate about what I'm talking about, I completely knocked the phone off the receiver. I'm sorry, everybody. Okay, let's just slip on through here. This is your review. And there we go. Who or what is not in the middle of the circle? So, of course, the danger is that that it can't be about any one person. It has to be about your organization and the values. And it's important that these relationships are shared. So if a development director, say, is going out on to meet with a prospect, bring the board president, bring the executive director, bring somebody. It should always be about sharing the values of the orchestra. So here's where we go and find these people. And, we call it low-hanging fruit. These are your board members know people. And sometimes I'll sit down with the board and say, who do you know? And all of a sudden I have the most friendless board in the world. Nobody knows anybody. They do. They just are scared to share that information with you. So you have to make sure that you promise them you won't approach these people without first a strategic discussion with them about who they're suggesting. And that will build trust and confidence in you from them. Your donors know people. Your musicians know people. Of course, your subscribers are always prospects. What percentages are your subscribers donors? Single ticket buyers are always prospects. Just because they're buying single tickets doesn't mean they're not prospects. We've seen a huge decline in subscriptions, most of us, and a huge increase in single tickets. And that happened after 9/11. People are more hesitant to commit long-term to a subscription. But until you've exhausted all of this low-hanging fruit and actually, met with these people, you would start, of course, with your subscribers who come from zip codes that are the most affluent, those subscribers who have been subscribing the longest. And you don't just meet with them and ask them for money. You start getting to know them. And this is really where I'd say as an executive director, about 50% of my time every week is spent on moves management somehow. And I expect my development director to be out of the office doing moves management all week long. And this is what we have to do to keep more people coming into the pipeline. Now, cherry picking is a little more challenging because these are people who may not know who you are. They may not know what you value, meaning you, the orchestra. And so this is where you try and find organizations that share your values. If you have a music education program, which most of us do, you're then going to go find and be involved with, or your board members will invite you to events that the Y is putting on, or the Boys and Girls Clubs, those kinds of events where you're going to meet people who value children and education. You'll see your other values, excellence. Well, a lot of corporations espouse excellence in terms of community service, or, they value, excellent cars. They use that in their mission statement and their taglines. You're going to find other organizations that, corporations or foundations that share your values. That's why it's important to know who you are. And you'll see social clubs, the Rotary. The reason I'm vice president of the Rotary, or was, and I'm a member of the Rotary, is because I wanted to meet with other people who value philanthropy. That's what the Rotaries do. Same is true with any social service club like that. Religious institutions, a lot of those people tithe, and they value spirituality, and music can be a very spiritual experience, so that's a shared value. Again, it's mobilizing your staff and your board to get out into the places in the community to help you if you're a staff member. So some tricks, I just wanted to bring this up very quickly. So it's important when you're out and you're standing in the valet parking line, which, you know, good fundraisers always valet park, because then at the end of the event, you're all sort of held hostage, stuck there waiting for your cars, but you've all just shared something together, whatever it is. And so it's easy to just stand there and say, you know, wasn't that a great event, blah, blah, blah. So what do? You talk, you start that conversation. It's important to get their business card. Don't just hand yours. They'll never call you. Get their business card, because then you can follow up. That's a trick. And when I walk into a room, any room, if I walk into a bank that's doing a presentation on, you know, the state of the economy, for example, all banks do those presentations for their high-end clientele. If I walk into a room, any room, I just know that everyone loves orchestral music. They just may not know it yet. I actually literally have that attitude because I know how much it changed my life. So I feel like I'm doing them a service and helping to improve their quality of life by introducing them to something that could change their lives. They'll never know if you don't help them, if you're not the matchmaker. Cultivation, the fear is that you meet somebody and then you go quickly and ask them for money. That's not a healthy way to do it. I've had to do that when we were in a crisis fundraising mode. The cultivation time gets shortened, but really the fancy phrase is non-transaction based encounters. Just during the cultivation process, don't ask them for anything. That's what that means. Get time to know, take time to know them. They're going to value and qualify you, so they're going to want to get to know you as well. And there are different ways to do this. Here's some cultivation ideas. Of course, you want to get them to a concert, because ultimately, if they hate the product, then you try and get them to a different concert. But if ultimately they just are just not their thing, then why waste time? Just because somebody's name is on a donor list or a donor wall doesn't mean, just because they're affluent, doesn't mean they like what we do. So it's important to get them there, and it's important to follow up. So, you know, you want to continue it and chat with them, invite them to meet with your board president or a board member or staff member. You want to try and include the spouse or significant other in this process as much as possible, because the formula is that if you don't, you'll get half the gift you could have gotten. So the more the spouse or the significant other, if there is one, is involved in this process, the greater the chance that the gift at the end will be bigger. Because a lot of people won't just go and write a $20,000 check without checking with their significant other first. Invitation to a board meeting, invitation to a lunch conversation, a personal handwritten thank you note. These kinds of things are part of the cultivation process. And often this is how it's done at the board level. The board members support the museum, and then the museum people ask, then you ask the museum people to support you. This is how it's done, usually with a staff member in there as well. We always like to have a staff member involved in these kinds of things. Solicitation really requires that you give your own gift first. And I don't mean just as a board member, I mean as a staff member too. If this is your role to fundraise, then I think it's important, for me anyway, that I have invested more than time. That is my job, but I want to show that it's also my passion and that I value it. So I think it's very important. If you're going to go and try and be a matchmaker, then you give your own gift first. The most effective way to solicit, as we all know through our marketing materials as well, is you're telling a story. It's not about, I need $10,000 to underwrite a concert. or I want, I need to raise $5,000 to cash flow. That is not a compelling reason to give money. So you have to state the problem or the situation, propose a solution, and how that person can help. You want to get that person invested, whether it's a corporation, foundation, government official, individual. You want their investment into solving the problem. Provide opportunities for support based on, let's say somebody's told you that their mom's favorite piece is Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, and you know that it's being programmed next year. You've remembered that, you've logged it. Every single person that is a sort of a major donor or that you're having these meetings with, you've actually, in the cultivation process, notated what they love. So you know that they love Beethoven. So you'll go back to them and say, I remember that you told me this, great news, we're doing it next year. Would you consider sponsoring the concert? So you're providing opportunities for them to make a difference. The answer will always be no if you don't ask. So you'll have a 100% success rate at failure if you never present the opportunities in front of them. So you can think about it that way. And what if they say no? Well, usually it's not now or not yet. So not yet means they're not ready. Maybe they need more cultivating. Not now means they just have another financial obligation. So I actually had somebody tell me they had a 3-year commitment to another organization in Long Beach. And I said, when is that over? And they gave me the year. And I said, great. So next year, we'll talk about how you can make a difference with the symphony now and sort of spread your wealth around the community. And that's exactly what's happened. If you ask too often, if you saturate people with asks, they'll get resentful pretty quickly. So make sure that you're staggering these and that you're also stewarding well. I just wanted to take a second because in 2 weeks we're doing the Major Gift Fundraising 201 that I'll be doing. And so a lot of people ask me, what's a major gift? The answer is this. It's different between me, it'll be different from the LA Phil or San Francisco Symphony, it's all different. The bottom line is if you get it or if you don't, it will make a difference. So, is that $1,000? If you got $1,000, would it change what you could do? If you didn't get the $1,000, would you have to cut something? Is that 10,000? Whatever that number is, that's how you know. It's a transformative gift. People want to leave a legacy. They want to make their dreams come true. They want to invest. That's what a major gift is. This is what we'll talk about in 2 weeks. Multi-year pledges, major gift programs versus campaigns, crisis, endowment, capital, plan giving. That's sort of the next step. So I hope you join me if you're ready for that conversation. Why do people give? Because they're asked. A lot of times when organizations are going through a financial crisis, they will cut their stewardship activity and line items, and it's very, very dangerous. My goal is to try to thank a donor 7 times a year. So that means, they give you a gift and you thank them at the reception. You thank them in writing. Our goal is to try and thank somebody within 72 hours with a letter. Maybe it's a phone call at a certain level. I make certain level phone calls. My development director makes certain level phone calls. Board members it depends on the level of the gift that came in. Look at all the ways you can thank people. What people really want is access. They want to be thanked through unique opportunities. The days of thanking people by giving them a shirt or a mug, those are less now. People see that that's their money going towards tchotchke. What they really want is access, special access to you, to your board president, to your product, to the musicians. So think about ways you can thank them. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. That allows them to get more deeply connected to who you are. Stewardship is non-transaction based encounters. You can't send a thank you letter with an ask. They have to be separated by time. So make sure that you're not trying to, because it's easier for you or less expensive for you, that you're not shortening the stewardship process. Stewardship equals connectedness, equals renewal. I know every year I get a solicitation, I told you before, where I'm just asked for money and I don't feel connected at all to this organization because all year long I haven't gotten a newsletter, I haven't gotten an update email. There's some organizations that are really, really good about this and keeping me connected and informed, especially the national organizations. So, this is something that we need to make sure we keep doing. Create a program, though, that includes who, what, when, how. Who you're thanking. Your one board member can be in charge of a stewardship program all year long. One board member, they're not asking for anything, but they're making sure that people get thanked in a variety of ways. Keep it manageable. The worst thing you can do is promise the world and it's overwhelming and you can't deliver it. People will remember that. And again, make it personal. The more personal you can make it, the better. You keep people connected. You want to renew their gift. Now, you could do it through direct mail appeal, and that we all do that. Usually when we send your subscriptions out, you have a line, you gave this, or renew again. But I would say something that really also bothers me when I get a solicitation is people have, organizations sometimes will say, we want you to renew it and increase your gift. Well, why? You've not given me a compelling reason to renew or upgrade my gift. Again, the more you keep them connected, the greater chance they'll renew. And is that person ready to give a little bit more? Is it good time for them? Do you have a compelling reason? If it is a major gift, those are always done in person, out of respect. If they're giving you a big gift, that should be something that you do, in my opinion, one-on-one, where it's a conversation and you're talking about what a difference they've made in the past, and let's talk about what a difference they can make next year. And always try and get them to introduce you to other prospects. You want them to be champions. So let's say they wanted to underwrite your Beethoven 5 concert. Are there other people that would join them in sponsoring that concert? And try to have those conversations with them and see if you can get other people and see if they can actually become the champion of that concert. Same goes true with upgrading. You always want to upgrade larger gifts in person. And even if it's a direct mail appeal, use a compelling reason. And I think we all do this pretty well in our direct mail appeals. You want to, bring in a more expensive guest artist, or that would be a concert enhancement, or you want to bring in screens, or you want to do Beethoven 9, which is a lot more expensive than Beethoven 5. You can have people underwrite the soprano or underwrite the choir. I'm ready to show the entire concert budget just for that concert and say, which of these did you want to sponsor? And they can look at, and it's the whole orchestra, which is going to be a little more expensive, or it could be the soprano soloist, which is going to be less, and have them, I would like to underwrite the baritone. And so they can pick and choose from a menu of things that you're providing them. Maybe you want to launch a special project or a commission or an education initiative. Again, these are the reasons. We want to give them compelling reasons why we hope that they will give us more. Increase in venue or personnel costs isn't as attractive as some of the other reasons, but they're real to us. And so some people might want to help with infrastructure. We'll talk more about challenging or matching opportunities in 2 weeks, but these are also very great tools. Some donor, we had one this year, wanted to put up a challenge match. So she wanted to, and it's confusing the terminology, but a matching opportunity is where somebody wants to give you money up front and then say, I challenge you all to match me. She's going to give it anyway up front. Whereas sometimes a different kind of campaign is where somebody says, I'll give $1 for every $1 you raise, and they're going to give it to you at the end based on your success raising. It's just semantics, essentially, and timing. I've spent a lot of time on the budget gap because I was a development director that inherited the gap. So when I was there, all the expenses in the budget process were tallied first, and then they would look at how much they could bring in ticket sales. And then there was this hole at the end, and that was my goal. And that's a great way to end in the red every year, by the way. That's actually, let's think of it from a different perspective. The budget is something where you look at your expenses, of course, in your concert season, and your ticket sales. And we know essentially what that might be based on the programming. But then instead of just throwing the rest towards fundraising, let's make sure that you have a donor base that can sustain that whole. And if you don't, you have to go back and you have to work with your music director or your conductor, and you have to go back and modify the artistic expenses or the admin expenses. So it should be a conversation. It shouldn't just be lobbed over to the development director, because what if you don't have those people? You'll get a development director that burns out, that doesn't support the goal, and that just is going to spiral into a negative situation. So determining the goal. Again, do you have the right mixture of donors to achieve your goal? And when I talk about this, development directors in the room are usually, or development personnel, thrilled because they feel like the board and the executive director need to hear this conversation. That's an important thing. You need your development staff or your board, whoever's doing the fundraising, to own the goal, because you want them responsible and accountable for it. Are there microeconomic or macroeconomic factors? So let me break that down. Microeconomic, are there other organizations that are launching big campaigns in your town that might take some of that money that year? That's important to factor in. Who else is doing things that might impact your donor base? That's local. Macroeconomics would be, are there big things happening in around the nation, around the world, where it could affect the stock market? If you've got a lot of donors on fixed incomes, they'll get nervous about that. Is there a political situation that's happening that could affect nervousness in your donor base? I mean, most of us rely almost too heavily on the donor base, right, versus earned revenue. And so if people start to get nervous, like the tax reform, we had a lot of people in December nervous about how that would impact their giving, rightly so. So are there things that are happening? You take all this into consideration when you're budgeting or when you're reforecasting. Do you have adequate staffing? Again, there's the formula in front of you. Is your board engaged in fund development? If your board is engaged and they know what to do and they're working on the moves management, you've got all these people coming in and you have a tracking system for all the people, and if that's going well, then yes, you can feel confident you can actually raise that goal, your fundraising goal. If not, if your executive director isn't engaged in fundraising and your artistic doesn't live there and isn't engaged, these are factors to consider. I'm very careful about the usage of my artistic director in this process, by the way. I usually leave that person I'm very sort of jealous of their time. And so when my music director is in town, we are very careful about who that person meets with and why. So there's a strategy behind it. We want to be very careful with his time. And so I also wouldn't put that person in a position where it would be uncomfortable and the donor's going to say no. So if we want the artistic director involved in a conversation where we're going to talk about a project where we want that person to underwrite, which is a very long way of saying we were going to make an ask, I'll know beforehand that it will be a yes. I may not know the level, but I would never put my artistic director in a situation where it's going to be a no, because that's just a really uncomfortable lunch. So tips for success. It really is easier than it seems, because it's not about you. It's about really feeling so passionate that you knock the phone off the hook. You're so passionate about your organization that you will change what you're doing. You will go outside your comfort zone, and you want to make things happen for your orchestra. That's going to require everybody in your organization to do something a little differently. It's not about you. It's about your organization and helping kids, bringing music to the world, sharing your passion and your enthusiasm. The goal is to listen more and talk less. So, for example, when you're going to meet with somebody and you know you're going to talk about how they can make a difference and at what level they want to underwrite, meaning the ask, if you're standing in line at the waiting to be seated, and the donor all of a sudden dumps a whole bunch of information on you, like, I have to go through a major house remodel, or I have to send my child off to UCLA and it's going to cost a fortune. And they will give you lots of excuses. They're trying to tell you to not have that conversation that day. So if you're listening and you're really in touch with, and you know your people, you'll switch gears. You'll sit down and you'll just do another cultivation or another stewardship luncheon instead of talking about that, or you'll talk about it in generalities. And just know that you're going to have that conversation at another time. But if you're doing all the talking about your organization and you're not asking them questions about what they value, or when did you first fall in love with classical music? Who's your favorite composer? What would you like to see on our season that we're not doing? Those are great questions that are value aligned and where you're getting to know your donor base. And I think it's well, again, whether they're individuals, corporations, foundations, they're all people, and they all want to know that they're connecting with you on an emotional level. And again, join me is the most powerful statement anybody in the organization can make. And that means that you are invested, you are passionate, you're enthusiastic. And if you're feeling stressed because you've gotten a lot of no's, not nows, just know that it's like a great golf game. It's that next shot that it's gonna just completely re-energize you about the organization and about fundraising, because you know the formula tends to be we get 9 no's for every yes, which is hard odds in our field. But it's that yes that is so incredibly exciting and will rejuvenate you. So just know, if you've got a lot of no's, that the yes is just around the corner. I would also say I get a lot of questions about how often are you out in the field? And we're out in the field a lot. So we're at everybody else's lunches and brunches and galas. And sometimes if they know we're coming, they'll seat us back by the kitchen, and that's fine. Because it doesn't take long before we're in the front canvassing the high-end donor tables in the front near the stage. And we're subtle about it, but everybody is doing it. And we're not making any asks there. We're just reconnecting with old friends and meeting new friends. It's that kind of attitude. A lot of corporations do a lot of lunches or breakfasts. So our board members, they're inviting us. We ask them to host us to these kinds of events, others galas, where other organizations have shared values. We spend a lot of time out of the office. And you do have to balance that, because you don't want to go crazy. There's a life balance that we strive for. But we tag team. So some board members will go to a certain nonprofit, the Boys Club. Others will go to the local opera company's gala. Others will go to concerts. We just expect our board that we're one of their top priorities. If they're on our board, that means that they've decided that they want to be an ambassador for us. And so we have a lot of people out in the field, because I can't do it all, you can't do it all, so we need help. And that's what the board really is for. And that's the end of Fundraising 101 officially. So considering I'd leave and call back in, I'm sort of impressed with the timing of all that. I'd love to answer some general questions.
Well, thank you, Kelly, for that amazing presentation and your passion in the middle of it. So if you do have any questions for Kelly, feel free to chat them into the chat box, and we can take those. Caroline, do we have any questions in the chat box?
No, we do not.
Oh, I was completely thorough. I did have a question that came into me just now from somebody else. It's what is the difference between what is an annual giving campaign versus a major gift campaign? And that's a really good question. Annual giving programs that we have tend to be on our timeline. We send out the renewals. We have money money that usually comes back in when people send in their subscriptions. So we're driving that timeline. We have our special events. We know we're going to direct our direct mail appeals. This is all part of your development plan. And I think you've all had access to how to create a development plan. I've done sessions on that. So if you want some samples, you're always welcome to email me directly. But the development plan is something that we create internally. So we make sure if we're on goal, it tells you how much you expect that year to come in from individuals, foundations, corporations, government, special events. And it compares it to last year. And so we know sort of anything that we're going to do differently, where we've increased or decreased the goals. It might have some information about microeconomics and macroeconomics in there. Then we take it to our development committee, and we get their support, their buy-in. this all happens now March, April, May of this year, because we then approve that budget for the July 1 start date in June. And so we want to make sure, and a lot of people have had their eyes on this development plan, meaning they've invested, they have ownership over the plan, and then ultimately we highlight areas where the board can be involved. We may not need them to write grants, but we do need them to help with the individual giving line item or the board giving or the special events, and then we have them feel accountability for that. That's an annual fund campaign. That tends to be how that works. The major gift campaign tends to be special projects or the bigger gifts, where you're talking with people. Some of it is time sensitive, like we want every concert to be underwritten would be the goal. So we have a champion for every concert who helps us get money for that concert. And that doesn't always happen. But some of the other major gift programs or campaigns tend to revolve around a special commission or a recording, the things that are sort of above and beyond maybe even that year's plan. It could be 2 years or 3 years down the line.
So Kelly, there is a question about your earlier points were made about individual giving being the biggest percentage. And do you have any thoughts or talking points that people could use in their boards who say, no, it's corporations and foundations, who cares what the stats are? I'm sure we've all come across that.
It's funny because often when you talk with boards, or when I do, and in my own board, they'll say, what we need is just another grant. Yeah. So because it's just easier to lob that back over to staff or the person who writes the grant. But really it's harder, but it's really the success is the number of individuals at all levels who have feel a connection to your organization. The difference between an organization and an institution is the degree of community ownership. So you'll look at organizations that, if you don't involve a lot of people, when something happens, whether it's economic tough times, or will you be missed? Will people think, no, we can't have a community without the symphony? That means that they feel a sense of ownership, that you enhance the arts and culture of their city, that the politicians in your area value you because you help drive people to come and live there. You're one of the reasons why people want to live in your town, because of the thriving arts and cultural scene. So your politicians have to be invested. Your county supervisor has to value you. There are ways to bring these people into the fold, and you're not going to necessarily ask them for money. It's just more of a public relations campaign, and that defines you as an institution, so that during tough times, people want to make sure that you are thriving or at least surviving. That's what makes a planned giving program successful. People who want to invest in you even after they've passed, and because they care so much about future generations. That's an institution. The Giving USA chart helps a lot in terms of meeting with board members. It's just hard for them to roll up their sleeves. But what I tell them is, if you have all the money you need, and usually we start with the music director talking about their dreams. But I say, if you have all the money you need, then don't do anything differently. Although inflation will go up, and so either you're going to throw that to ticket sales, which could be a problem if you keep just throwing all of that additional expense to ticket sales. You'll burn out your patrons. But if you want to do something differently, if you want to realize these dreams, and if you want to realize your music director's dreams, then the solution is in the room. It's not some additional outside funder that you need to go get. The solution is in the room. And that's often a very sobering statement. They realize that it's not that next golf tournament, or if they just had a better brochure. They're actually going to have to pick something. And at the end of the day, what you can do is hand out the circle of giving and ask them to circle what part of the circle of giving, whether it's stewardship or cultivation or prospect identification, and then sign it, date it, and hand it back to you. Or hand it back to the board president, and get them to commit to what place in that moves management that they're actually going to help do something differently than what they're doing. Did that answer the question?
Yes. And Kelly, what are your thoughts about having a development committee on your board, or making it the responsibility of every board member? I mean, what are your thoughts on having a development committee where it's one committee on the board versus everyone sort of being involved?
I want both. So I like a development committee because I think it's important to have certain people whose sole mission on the board is to own the goals. And, this is where your special event chairs can come and be validated. So I think it's, especially with big boards, you want to make sure that you have a place for everybody. But I think, as I mentioned, it's everybody's job. It's part of good governance as to be in charge of resource development. So that's your executive director, your music director, and the finances, and to be involved in the fund development process. That's my expectation. It doesn't always happen. And of course, some people would rather just write a check, and that's fine. That's fund development. But it's important to me that every board member gives cash. It's important. We do have a couple of in-kind board members, but we have them only they offset a budget line item that we would be spending cash anyway. So it does help with decreasing the expense line item. But most of our board members, even those who are in kind, give cash somehow. And I think that's really important. We run on cash. That's what runs organizations. And we're a business, and we have to have cash to operate. So, that's why it comes down to it's everybody's job to be involved.
Great. Caroline, are there any more questions in the queue?
No, I don't see any.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Kelly, for your wonderful presentation and your time. And I know that we have one more poll for folks that say, after this presentation, do you feel less nervous, or do you like fundraising, or will you like it as you put into this? So we're just going to launch this sort of just to get the pulse of the room. Give a couple seconds. All right, 100% said they feel less nervous or like fundraising after this presentation. So,
yay!
Congratulations. Thank you so much. Just want to share that there are, as Kelly mentioned, in 2 weeks, we will have the Fundraising 201 session, which Kelly will talk about some of the ideas of multi-year pledges, major gift programs, crisis funding, endowments, some of the bigger pieces. And then also, we just want to save the date for the 2018 annual conference that will be in Sacramento. And Kelly, your presentation will be made available. We'll make sure that we get that to folks after this webinar. And also, this webinar has been recorded, and we will make sure that it is in the members only section of our website. So if you wanted to go back and see it again, or have a board member watch it, it will be archived in the coming days. So on behalf of Kelly and AXO, thank you for joining us. And if you have any questions for us after this webinar is ended, feel free to email us at membership@axo.org. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your Wednesday.